Right. So the subject of the grand assault is really fascinating. It is a unique thing that you see develop throughout the 19th century that has roots in assaults right from the earlier century. And in the process of trying to dig up as much information as we can in this presentation, right, there really are an impressive and extensive amount of digitization of newspapers, various images, and books. All of this, have allowed us to really delve into this subject. Um, while while there were many fencing demonstrations and tournaments and challenges in previous centuries, the grand assault really takes on a unique characteristics and a structure. And this is really what we're going to delve into over the next hour plus length of time.
Right. So there's typical characteristics that denote the grand assault in general. So as we go through, you'll see we're actually doing a survey of a variety of grand assaults that happened throughout the 19th century. But as you'll see, we have created a kind of a list of the things that are typical in grand assault. They don't always all exist in each grand assault, but for the most part, these are the things that really that we look for, that let us know that this is along that line. So typically a grand assault will be designed to raise money for a particular person or an institution. It is usually used also as a promotional event for a particular master for his school or academy. There's also an entrance fee, and the grand salute is also performed. The grand salute is typically performed before any assault, whether it's a grand assault or even if it's in the context of the academy, the students would be doing the salute before they fence with the other students.
And the grand salute is the other topic that we'll discuss much later in a different presentation.
Typically, refreshments are also included. Usually, at least if, for example, if there's a grand assault announced to promote a particular master, usually they also invite other masters to come, or at least one other master to help with demonstrations in the presentation. And often music is being played either in the beginning, during the interludes, and as you'll see, there's one where they're actually playing music to announce almost every single bout. So we begin our history of the grand assault of arms in the 18th century with one of the most renowned fencers,
the famous.
If I can get the slideshow to work. There we go.
Mm-hmm. So, for those of you who we just admitted into the lecture, these are typical characteristics of the grand assault. And in one form or another, every grand assault has these characteristics.
The Chevalier de Saint George and the Chevalier Dion are in this painting, and they did this exhibition in front of, excuse me, in front of the Prince of Wales and a lot of other royalty. And it's a very famous painting. It's still it belongs to the royal family. It's still in their collection.
I really like their shoes.
Right. But the interesting thing is that the first evidence we find in terms of advertisements is advertisements, particularly for the Chevalier Dion. So here we have the first one that I'm aware of from 1795.
Oh, so so what you see, this is in the Chester Chronicle from 1795, and it has, for one night only, you too can attend at a great room, the Hotel Chester, this present Friday, March 27th. The celebrated Chevalier Dion will make an assault d'armes with an English gentleman, a professor in the art of fencing. The Chevalier will appear in the same uniform which she wore at the time when she served as the captain of dragoons in the army of Marshal Duc du Broglio in Germany. The fencing to begin perfectly at 8 in the evening. And I love this. This keeps coming up. All of the grand assaults are held in the evening. I'm not a morning person. Evening is best. Particular care will be taken that the room is well aired and lighted, and a band of military music will attend. Admittance, 2 shillings and 6pence. Tickets to be had of Mademoiselle Dion at the hotel and at the bar of the inn.
So if that advertisement was also more lengthy, but rather than put the text up, we'll read the text. These are just images of the Chevalier Dion as a female and as in female attire and male attire, and there's a lot of these pictures of her. She was evidently that a lot of people were fascinated by the Chevalier.
Yeah, and if you're unfamiliar with the Chevalier Dion, he was definitely a spy working for the French in London, and then at a particular point fell out of favor with the King of France, and he would send people in to try to kidnap him and bring him back to France, at which point he started dressing like a woman and became really famous in London because that made him much harder to kidnap.
Yes. And so briefly, the other ad also was just explaining that Dion has fallen into hard times because of the revolution. She's not able to access any of her monies from her own properties in France. The King of France left her a pension, but again, she's not able to access the pension. And then the King also of France sent some money to a particular English gentleman who kind of used that money for himself. And so she didn't have access to that. So these grand assaults that she's doing are to raise money for herself as a way of supporting herself.
Right. And so back to the list of things that are inherent in a grand assault, right? It's trying to raise money for a person or a cause or a school.
And this next ad advertises it as a great assault of arms. We don't see the term grand assault yet, but it's coming. Mm-hmm. A great assault of arms. And as we said, tickets were sold. It was for her benefit. In this particular ad, we see that music was going to be performed. And if the ladies and gentlemen that had the inclination, they could also dance. The other thing is the Chevalier went, there's actually quite a few ads for her doing these grand assaults. or these assaults, because she went all around England in 95 and 96, 1795 and 1796, continuously doing this as much as she could, so that she would have a living. And the other thing is of note is that at the time she was 68 years old when giving these demonstrations. This is another one of the ads, but now it's called the Grand Assault of Arms.
This is 1795.
Right. So this is the earliest one as advertised as a Grand Assault of Arms. Again, this is for the Chevalier Dion to raise money for herself. Now we're moving to the U.S., Baltimore, Maryland. Grand Assault of Arms. Mr. Grain, pupil of the famous Mr. Gomard of Paris, desires to open an academy of fencing in the city of Baltimore. Respectfully informs the gentleman, and particularly the amateurs of the art, that on Tuesday next, the 1st of May, he will give the most splendid assault with the small sword, in which several amateurs will distinguish themselves in fencing. The assault will commence by the grand salute of the mur contra, etc., by him and Mr. Marshall, fencing master. Door to be open at 4 o'clock and commence at half past 4 at Mr. Rosenville's, the late Gray's garden, where every kind of refreshment, etc., will be fine. Entrance 50 cents.
If only. So I just want to go back in case you're not familiar. We had mentioned that aspects of the Grand Assault, and that's the Grand Salute. And here it's listed as the Salute of the Mur Contre, which becomes the Grand Salute.
Well, it's actually listed as the Grand Salute.
Yeah.
As well. So it's just that they list it that way, I think, because the Mur of Contra is actually the exercise of thrusting in tierce apart, and that becomes a part of the salute, and then eventually becomes what you see at the end of the 19th century as the Grand Salute. Does someone have a question?
Yep, I think they just turned off their microphone.
Okay.
And now from Boston to New York. We've entered the 19th century.
Okay, this is an interesting one. It's the second event by this particular academy. The first one is actually announced as a Grand Assault of Arms, and in this particular one, it still fits the same category as a Grand Assault, but they're trying to make it sound even grander, and so they've changed the name to Grand Fencing Exhibition and Tournament, in the style of those given in Europe before kings and princes of France and other courts. The illustration is an illustration of a circus from 1865, of the building where the circus was in 1865. But we've included here so you kind of have an idea of what the circus would have been, the venue for this particular assault. And that one would have not had a roof. It was open. And probably the arena would have been a lot larger because the owners were Pepin and Breschard, who were equestrians, and they were the first ones to build a circus in New York City on Anthony Street, just off of Broadway.
They should have called it the Grand Extreme Assault of Arms.
Exactly. So I'm just going to read you from a very abridged summary of the content, what happened at this particular assault. The event was held by Colonel Delacroix Fencing Academy. Music performed by the Band of Independent Cadets. The overture announced the entrance of 20 fencers and judges. A warlike trumpet announced the commencement of the tournament. The fencers were assigned by lots into 10 assaults. The 10 winners, composed of 5 assaults, went on to fence and vie for the prize. The Governor Tompkins' march was announced all 8 assaults. The Major General Ebenezer Stevens' march announced all the cut and thrust. And other music announced the arrival of the cavalry in uniform of the Hussars of Independent Cadets. They presented a demonstration of 6 divisions of the broadsword and several maneuvers at the solicitation of the colonel. And the whole thing was concluded by the distribution of the prizes and a demonstration of the general attack and defense of the cavalry on horseback. Price of admittance was 50 cents, and tickets were to be purchased at Colonel Delacroix's military rooms. So I imagine that would have been pretty grand with all the music playing and all, and they seem to have generated a lot of interest, as this was their second one, and the first one was well received, so they decided to do another. Now we're in Philadelphia in 1812.
Charles Gally Peroni, professor of fencing, has the honor to inform his friends and the public in general that he intends to give a grand assault on Saturday, the 22nd instant at Mr. Aurore's Ballroom, number 64, 4th Street, which will commence with the broadsword. A display of the most astonishing feats will be made by gentlemen of distinguished talents in the exercise of the small sword, and the amusement of the evening will be terminated by a grand ball. Each gentleman may bring with him 2 ladies, the same band of music, favorite band of, I can't read that, of the Pandia minstrels, which accompanied the exhibition of the last assault, will again contribute to the amusement of the company. He flatters himself that the public will be gratified by the peculiar attention he will give to the display of a number of new feats of arms, purposely introduced in order to show the beauties and usefulness of this noble art. All the professors are invited to attend if they please. The assault will begin at 6 in the evening precisely. Admittance, $1, so they upped the price. The refreshment will be delivered in Italian and French fashion.
I think that's my favorite part. So again, is promoting his school, promoting himself. Tickets were sold. There was a ball held as part of the festivities, and refreshments were served.
And gentlemen, you may bring 2 ladies.
2 ladies, yes. So this is this is the first one that we found for France. Right now we're still researching France, because while we find a lot at the end of the 19th century, we haven't found that much information in the beginning of the 19th century, but it's still a work in progress.
Right, yeah, information referring specifically to the grand assault and the formation of it and the use of the term. We have a lot of information in English, and in France it's a little more difficult to try to find information on the grand assault early in the 19th century.
So this is a grand assault of a point, meaning that it would have been a grand assault of small sword or foil, with no cutting weapons at all. It's being done so it's Maitre Porte whose assault it is, and he's he says he has the honor of presenting his students that are testing or passing for master and provost of point. At that time, you could get a diploma that would have been just of point, or you could get a diploma that is of contrepoint, which would have been of for saber. You could also get a diploma just for cane. So that was an interesting. Well, that's another aside. That's for another time. So again, it's to promote the particular master and promote his students. And he actually lists all of the participants. And we'll be seeing that later on as well in the latter part of the 19th century. We see them listing the participants. Okay. This is the from the Willis rooms. It's an interesting assault because this is now being done by the military. So this particular one is a military one. On Saturday, a very interesting performance of the kind took place at the Willis Rooms under the patronage of Colonel John Hall and the officers of the 1st Regiment of Life Guards. There was a large and highly respected audience of visitors present who appeared to have a warm interest in the proceedings. The exhibition comprised swordsmanship, stick play, sparring, and other amusements, and was commenced by Messrs. Arnold and Sherry taking the foils. They were followed by Messrs. Bushman and Jackson, Toole and Sherry, Sergeant Collins and Winterbottom, each pair of who showed surprising mastery of their weapon and the due combination of elegance with dexterity. This part of the performance was succeeded by a saber encounter between Mr. Bushman and Sergeant Toohey, in which the latter, notwithstanding his marvelous rapidity and audacity of manner, was obliged to succumb to the calm and well-directed skill of the former. A still more attractive exhibition was the opposition of the bayonet to the sword for the purpose of testing which is the most efficient weapon. The musket and spring bayonet attack was wielded by Sergeant Toohey in the first instance, Mr. Bushman taking the sword. After a time, the former getting rather the worst of it, the different weapons were exchanged, and in the hands of Mr. Bushman, the victory, which seemed at first to rest in favor of the sword, was eventually decided by the bayonet. After this part of the performance had terminated, Mr. Bushman performed feats of cutting through a large leg of mutton with one sweep of the saber. He also severed a thin handkerchief previously placed on his sword's edge and handed around the large bar of lead which he had cut in two 2 days previously. So you see on the right, the cutting the mutton, and this doing sword feats became a thing in these assaults and demonstrations, most particularly in the UK, in the United Kingdom. Here's another grand assault. This one in 1855 in New York City.
Grand assault of arms. Saturday the 6th. Assault d'armes, Messrs. Servatus, Broadway at 7 o'clock in the evening. Again, evening. Let's see here.
Proceeds with a demonstration of the etudes and exercises of fencing.
First part.
Yes, it's engagements, is a series of disengagements, the dégagement, and the doublé. Then performance of the grand salute, le mur et les contres.
Mhm. Third, you have the grand assault, it's saber or sword. And the fourth part, you have the assault with the dueling sword. Fifth part, you have the exercises and play of the cane. And then finally, you have the grand assault of the dueling sword.
Entrance fee, 50 cents. The other interesting thing is, well, for me anyways, the other interesting thing is that these are advertisements from New York City, but it's all written in French in a French newspaper in New York City.
Because if you were civilized, you spoke French.
Okay. This is an exhibition of the Boston Fencing Club at Penty Hall from the Harper's Weekly of 1859.
I would love to do an exhibition in that hall.
Yes, yes. So this is interesting to me more for the way that this is written. Mr. Pampini's hall was filled with closely seated throng of ladies, save only a square space reserved for the combatants that was occupied by standing men. The exhibition consisted during the first hour and a half at least of fencing, the broadsword exercise, and the single stick play. It is useless to attempt any description of what is indescribable to one who has not seen similar display, absurdly unnecessary to one who has. Those who entered the ring, which was a square for the play of single stick, imagine a cross between a suit of marine diving apparatus and the armor of the Middle Ages. The whole made of stuffed buckskin. An intolerable notion will be gained of the general effect of the defensive preparations necessary. Even with these safeguards so palpably before the eyes, some of the spectators could occasionally wish they wouldn't strike quite so hard. Great muscular power, dexterity, grace were displayed and applauded, even from fair hands, certainly from admiring eyes, rewarded the eager combatants. Here was an excellent opportunity to observe the natural effects of the sport like this. For the first time in their lives, most of these fair spectators looked upon a scene like this. They came not knowing what they were to see. Now look about, note the expression of the different countenance of these unbiased witnesses. Excited, pleased, delighted, and delight is depicted in nearly all. Here and there, a nervous anxiety of look shows an unduly timid nature. But the general survey shows that pleasure and admiration and pride in the hearts of the rest, pleasure in the sight, admiration for the skill displayed, pride, shall we say it, in the thought that in their own small hand lay the greater power that swelled in the muscles which controlled the flashing steel. And why should not the refined influence of women be shed upon many sports? Why should she not lend her inspiring presence to exercise which gives strength to the graceful and grace to the strong? The example of Boston may be profitably imitated by the rest of the country. There is no healthier sport than fencing.
But we shall not speak on it.
Yes. This is another Grand Assault advertised in 1864, and this was in French at Madden. It's a particular assault. And I always have a hard time with his name. His name is Maître Pelling of Paris, and he's advertising this assault to in having this assault is a lot of other masters that are coming to do this assault. It's a promotion of the salon of de la conversación, which I'm not sure exactly what it was. It appears to be some kind of institution where he taught. And he also lists the judges for the assault, because it also was a prestigious thing to be asked to be a judge in these assaults. So you often see members of the aristocrats of very high society, or officials that military officials that are asked to be judges. This is 1865. The non-commissioned officers of several regiments of the Guard gave an entertainment at St. James Hall in the aid of the fund of the Royal Caledonian Asylum, in which many children of the soldiers are maintained and educated. The Prince of Wales was among the spectators. Raised in rope platform in the center of the hall was the arena in which the competitors exhibited their prowess, and on the floor of this platform was traced a chalk and colors a colossal Prince of Wales plume, which served the purpose of ornament and secured firm footing. Single stick fencing, boxing, saber combat, saber versus bayonet performed the staple of the entertainment and served to show the proficiency of the men who took part in the various bouts. The celebrated Corporal Major Waite participated in the single stick fencing and gave demonstrations of various sword feats. So this is Colonel Waite cleaving a breastplate. We know a lot about these sword feats from the book that he wrote. His book is the Lessons in Saber, Single Stick Saber, Bayonet, and Sword Feats. And his name is John Musgrave Waite. And that can be found online if anyone's interested. Here's another French advertisement for a grand assault of arms. This one is for the benefit of the provost, of his provost.
Tickets are only 5 francs.
Yep. And
it's a deal at any price, really.
And all the assaults are by some rather famous fencing masters of the time.
Rouget was famous.
Hyacinth.
Yep.
Yeah. And actually, this particular master, which again, I forget how to say his name, Pelling.
So
because there's 2 of them.
So we were having a debate on, so in a slide earlier, you have Mr. Pelling, and this is Mr. Pelling. So we're trying to decide if it's the same person or different people.
But it appears it's 2 different ones, because the names do appear in other places. But both of them seem to have been quite famous at the time. So this is from 1870, as 13th annual assault of arms of this club took place before a numerous and fashionable company, a fair portion of spectators being ladies. The program contained 14 trials of skill and strength in different exercises. The quarterstaff play is a great novelty, and the competitors are recalled to the stage. There were also boxing matches and feats of strength with the clubs. So this is the Artillery Athletic Club that is presenting this in 1870. And the illustration is from the Illustrated London News. You can also see the amount of padding that they're wearing and the padded gloves for this. This is from the Royal Albert Hall in 1881. And from the article, it says gymnastic staff of the Aldershot Gymnasium, assisted by non-commissioned officers and men of the Army and Navy in the aid of the Afghan War Relief Fund. The event was given under the direct patronage and in the presence of their Royal Highnesses, the Prince and Princess of Wales. Indeed, it may be said that every member of the royal family, except its head, the Queen, was present on the occasion. Fencing, boxing, dumbbells, saber versus saber, saber versus bayonet, bayonet versus bayonet, single sticks, sword feats, Indian clubs, cutlass and bayonet exercises, lance exercises, vaulting horse, and more. So it's nice to, so this is nice also that we have this particular image from the newspaper that shows this. My particular favorite is all the people in the boxes trying to take a look at the royalty that's in the box below them. The band of the 2nd Life Guards, the Royal Horse Guards, the Grenadier Guards, the Coldstream Guards, and the Scott Guards played throughout the performance. This is the Grand Assault of the Hotel Dolphus in 1881. Let's see if I can move this. Okay. The Grand Assault at the Hotel Dolphus, until now, the only kind of sport with the ability to move the public, and especially the high life, was races on the various race courses that surround Paris. Since duels have multiplied more and more, there is passion for the assault of arms. And some people of the world are resurrecting the uses and customs of the old chivalry, organizing combat in the close field with luxury and brilliance that recall the tournaments of old.
So what's really interesting in this particular image, and is that as opposed to just demonstrating saber versus bayonet or quarterstaff or foils and dueling sword, they're looking back and bringing back the idea of earlier weapons and costumes and looking at old modes of etiquette and in bringing this into the Grand Assault. And this definitely becomes a thing during the late 1800s.
Right. And now we're starting to see that the actual the place where these things are held are now these grand hotels that existed in the end of the 19th century. They really show the Belle Epoque, where everything is now really luxurious, and there is a lot of wealth both in France and in Great Britain, in the Americas. There's a lot of wealth, and so all these really large grand hotels, because also people are traveling quite a bit. So it's important that the event itself takes place in a place that represents how grand they're trying to make this. So a lot of the article, which is why it's not here, is really in describing the hotel. So now the Grand Assault in France in 1882. And this is the provosts of the fencing schools in Paris get together, and they put on a Grand Assault every year. This one is done at the Grand Hotel, and the Grand Hotel becomes a venue used a lot for these Grand Assaults. In the article, they say, no doubt the name of the Baron de San Malato, was a great attraction of the meeting, and Messrs. I can't read that because there's
Paul Houzé and
Paul
Michon.
Rousset and Michon have also offered their assistance to the provost. So those are very famous masters. Baron Salmalato, Italian master, who came to France a lot and is in a lot of these salts. The Salmalato and Michon at the end of their salt are the object of a veritable ovation. So the actual Grand Assault was a series of assaults among the provosts, but the highlight and what we see in the illustrations are Ruiz and Michon and the Baron Salmalato, because essentially they're the big names, the big stars in this.
Yeah, I like how the Baron here is in fancy dress with high boots. That's how you know he's the Baron.
This is the Grand Assault in New Orleans.
A grand, extraordinary attraction. Right? You have to keep selling it more and more. It'll be given in concert hall with seats for 2,500 people, opening at 4 p.m., so early. The Grand Assault to arm with swords, broadswords, under the direction
of the
professors Gustave Rosier and Christoval Morel, in which prominent gentlemen will take part. After which, dramatic performance, All That Glitters Is Not Gold, performance to begin at 8, bombardment immediately after performance, followed by a grand ball. They're referring to fireworks, by the way. In connection with these exhibitions, there will be valuable prizes for the victorious swordsman worth $1,500 worth of prizes to be drawn and disposed of in the hall to the holders of the lucky numbers. Each ticket has a numbered coupon and entitles the holder to entrance to hall for all exhibitions. Trains will run every 15 minutes from 3 p.m. and all night. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And as we mentioned earlier, how through the end of the 19th century, these things move from just being an exhibition of skill at arms to being more of a spectacle, where you have performances, right? You have these plays, and you have people wearing costumes of earlier periods, right? It really just takes on a whole new presentation.
This is one of my favorite images, precisely as we were just saying, the presentation of and how this is, and even though they're doing foil in this image, everyone is dressed really essentially to the nines, if you will. But then you also have all of the people that are surround that in very early costume and some kind of fantastical costumes as well.
Look at those ruffs.
Yes,
those are amazing.
Yes. The ruffs are amazing for sure.
Yes, those were high heel boots that Salmalato was wearing.
So this is the international tournament held in Turin in 1884. The tournament was held in conjunction with the Great Universal Exposition hosted in Turin, Italy. The Great Universal Exposition was something that started in the 19th century and went through into the 20th century, where it became the World's Fair. I think the last one in New York was in the 60s, possibly. But these World's Fair were held at different times in different countries. So this particular one held in Turin brought people from all over Europe. For this particular tournament, 400 amateurs and masters registered for the tournament. They had different categories for masters and amateurs. With few exceptions, those who had, with a few exceptions, they all had to test before a jury to qualify in a particular category to be able to fence in this event. With the exception of a few who had been in a tournament in 1881 that was held in Milan. If they had won the gold or silver there, they didn't have to test or be judged for this particular one. There were 3 categories of classification, and if you didn't get classified in those categories, you were not fencing. So not all 400 were fencing. They really reduced the number. The jury is, no master could sit on the jury. The jury, again, is a jury of people that are either in government or, for example,
well-to-do.
Yeah, very wealthy, or the head of society. So like, for example, the head of the Society for the Encouragement of Fencing in France was one of the judges in this particular tournament. So while they advertise it as a tournament, it does fit the definition of a grand assault, in that everything at that time, as we were saying, is done in a very grand manner. They're looking to really promote the fencing, not a particular school, but they're looking at this as a way of promoting fencing to a larger public, because it is being done in conjunction with this large universal exposition. One of the interesting things about this is that they use the same rules, or very similar rules, not exactly the same, but very similar rules to the tournament that was held in Milan in 1881. And so when you were being judged to be able to enter or to be assigned to one of these categories, a jury of 25 judges were looking at this very strictly, and this is one of the things that they would look for. They would look for perfection in the guard, variation, their use and variation of invitations and attacks, the speed of their repos, they're maintaining proper measure, if there were simultaneous thrusts that occur, who, if there were, who was more wrong, because then they would be eliminated. Precision of all the movements and courtesy of manners.
Love it.
Love it. Yeah, me too. And again, it's great. This image is great because it also shows faces of some of the masters that were here in this particular event. And all the ones that are here are actually quite famous Italian masters. Okay, this is a program. I wasn't able to find an article about it, but I do have the program. It's called yes, it's for to raise money for a particular charity. It's to raise money for the poor. The majority of the participants are fencing masters. They do have music playing at intervals. It is advertised as the Grand Assault of Arms. With the music is by the 63rd line. I have no clue who they are. But the program shows all of the people, the members of the jury, the president, the program, and one of the one of them is so the Mergenacks. There's three brothers that are actually not three brothers, but there's a father. This is Louis Mergenac.
Yeah.
And then there's Emile, who I think is the brother. They always confuse me. And there's a third. But they always appear at this time in all of these assaults. Primarily, there's going to be one of them is going to be in one of these assaults. And it's fascinating because they're always they're considered one of the premier families of fencing masters. But it's also fascinating that they give of their time for these, because all of these are, they're fencing in various grand assaults is to raise money for a particular cause. This being for the poor and needy in this in the village of Limoges. So this is a program for a Salle d'Armes Beaumarchais for 1886, promoting the assault, but it also fits the category of a grand assault because, as you see, there is food being served. It's in a grand location. There is music being played, and there's and at the end, all these fencers, there is prizes being awarded. And also the music I like in this program because they're actually listing all the music. So it would be fun to recreate this using all that music that they're playing here. And the prizes is I already said that their prizes are being given out. Okay, here we have another assault at the Cirque d'Été for the benefit of those affected by the flooding of the Canal Midi. And if we believe this illustration, there is a lot of people there. Music was played by the Grand Republican, I believe it's called. Emile Mergenac, Duret, Provost, Roux, Louis Mergenac are among the prominent masters participating. Mm-hmm. This was a really grand assault. In the fencers in the illustration are Professor Roux, a left-hander, and Mr. Franconi. So that is Professor Roux on the left and Franconi on the right.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic, just the size of the audiences that are depicted in a lot of these illustrations.
Yeah. And the article does mention who some of these people are, and they're all really high political. And I believe, I don't remember offhand for sure, but I believe it's also the president of the Republic is attending this one. And he does seem to, the president of the Republic actually does seem to attend a lot of grand assaults. Okay, this is one from Italy. The Accademia the military academy. It says guerre, which means war, but in this case would be assault for horseback, fencing and gymnastics and shooting. It's from 1894. And then the program lists all of the, so for example, gara means competition. So it's competition in the horsemanship. In fencing, with the sword and fencing with the saber, gymnastics. So there's quite a variety. There are masters. There's a lot of military. Well, it's all military because it's military academy performing this. And a shooting competition, target shooting competition. Another thing is, for me, that's interesting about these, the program is a lot of these, if it's military, they tend to always have like this one with, with some type of military person, either on a horse or with a lot of swords and guns and rifles, etc. And the other ones tend to relate, to have images that relate back to the 16th century or the 17th century, because they're really making that connection of the longevity of fencing. Oops, went too far. If I go back. Okay, so this one is Fencing Through the Ages, festival organized by at the Grand Hotel by the Society of Encouragement for Fencing, 1894. And so these, this particular one, they're actually, the fencers are actually dressed from those particular time periods. So they start from the 16th century moving forward. And then you have, in this illustration, you see the fencing masters on stage watching, and they're also judging because they also have a winner. Although I'm sure that these demonstrations, the outcome is already decided. The Eminence Hemicycle Salon at the Grand Hotel was hardly enough to contain the elegant crowd that had responded to invitation from the society. The flower of our great fencing circles and the most famous fencers from our salle d'armes were naturally pressed up at the very foot of the platform, which was elevated. And again, if we believe the illustration, there's a lot of people here.
And I think this is great because they're demonstrating historical sword play, and it's this reenactment thing that ties into the spectacle of the presentation.
So these are some of the presentations that were done. So you see from the 16th century, and then later 16th century at the end with sword and dagger. '17th century.
This picture is so wrong for lots of reasons.
Yes, but we can't really blame the fencers. The illustrator illustrates it the way he envisions it.
Yep.
Right. And back to the Chevalier Dion, this became a very regular thing to do to recreate that famous bout between Chevalier Saint George and Chevalier Dion. And you see in the illustration to the right, the Chevalier Dion disarming the Chevalier Saint George. Although I think in this one there wasn't. It was just the Chevalier Dion fencing a Frenchman. I don't think this was the Chevalier Saint George. This Okay, this is another one. This is a program, the Grand Assault Historique of 1895, organized by the Society Encouragement for Fencing. This is the cover of the program, which was the event promised the year before. So the previous illustrations that we saw was the first event that they did in 1894. This is their follow-up event. And this particular event is even grander with many more demonstrations. And in particular, it is advertised as a historical, as a grand assault of history. You see in the illustration, again, the Chevalier Dion at the bottom right-hand corner. You see military, is it Langsnest?
Lansknecht.
Lanskin. Okay. You see Romans, you see Celts, 16th century, 17th century.
Musketeers are in there on the left.
Oh, on the bottom left is the Maupin against the three, this famous duel where she fences against three gentlemen after some slight and kills all three. So this is the program. It's a huge program where they go through and they list all of the people and most of the people that are recreating these assaults are fencing masters. And there is after the intermission, there's something that's interesting. Is there is a poem written by Monsieur Arnold Sylvester that is read by Mademoiselle Moreno, and it's entitled La Femme et la épée, meaning the woman and the sword. We'll have to find that because that sounds like that could be interesting. And then there is a recreation of the famous duel of La Maupin that is done by Madame Gabrielle, whose husband was a famous fencing master. And I believe she eventually becomes a fencing master herself. And then there is the recreation of the assault between the Chevalier de Saint-Georges and the Chevalier Dion. And that's done by Mademoiselle Peppa Invernici and Mademoiselle Sal. Peppa Invernici was a famous actress. She learned fencing. A lot of these actresses at the time took fencing, and evidently she was really good because she's in a lot of other demonstrations as well. You see her. But she worked for the opera. There are duels that are being recreated, and at the very end, there's even a late 19th century duel with the officers. The officer de Suaves against the Russian officers. Okay, now we have an assault of arms in 1898. This at the rooms of the Hotel de Ban. The assault it's an annual assault of arms. So you start to see that as well, where there are assault of arms that become an annual thing. This is for the benefit of a charity. The program includes foil sabre, épée de combat, boxe française. And one of the interesting things is Professor Vignier is there, and he's doing a demonstration of self-defense with a cane. He also is doing box française as well. So Professor Vignier is known because he also has left many writings on defensive rue, meaning defense on the street with cane, and his wife was also quite famous, where she's also is they're also fencing masters, where she also would do a lot of demonstrations of for example, how to use an umbrella to defend yourself, etc.
And an additional note on Vignier is that he would travel to London and teach cane defense at Barton Wright's school, which Barton Wright founded Bartitsu, which everyone talks about, which is an amalgamation of judo, boxing, and French cane. However, Barton Wright, his system died when he was still alive, so he's not really that important. But Vignier, on the other hand, knew what he was doing.
Yeah, he's pretty huge. The other thing here is that there is, after all of the assaults, there is a grand ball. Again, fitting with all the other, what we looked at all the elements of what a grand assault is and the things that are characteristics of these assaults. This is an assault, it's entitled Assault du Figaro in 1901. It's because it is held at the Salle. The Figaro was the newspaper, and it actually had its own salle d'armes, probably because a lot of reporters ended up dueling over things they wrote. The Figaro had a salle d'armes with complete hydrotherapy included. I like that idea.
A spa.
Yeah, spa. It took the initiative in hosting 2 international fencing tournaments in Paris and held frequent assaults in the Salle that were well attended by the famous socialites. And so below, where it says Assault du Figaro in the image, they list they list some of the names of the people that are here, but it's funny because at the very end they say among other people, but you know who these people are just by looking at the image. So evidently, because the front rows are all fencing masters, so the people in the foreground are all fencing masters. So they don't need to list everyone because people at the time would have known who all these people were. And then I don't have an image for this, but I found this one interesting. There's a gala de scream but it fits all the, again, now when they say gala or they say fete, it's still a grand assault. This gala de scream was proposed to raise the money for widows and children of deceased soldiers from the battleship Liberty, which exploded in Toulon Harbor in September 1911. And that was, it was a horrific accident with 226 dead, 328 injured on the sailors on that ship. So these particular fencing masters all got together to raise money for the widows and children of the deceased from this terrible tragedy. So to begin, being very patriotic, they played La Marseillaise, and they had a raffle. Again, besides charging money to come in, they also had a raffle so that you could, I'm not sure what was being raffled, but so again, another way of raising money. The salute or le mur was done by Louis Mergenac and Camille Provost. There was a lecture There was a ode to the sword by Count Malinsky, the president of the Baudry Circle, recited by Mademoiselle Robin. There was épée salts by Joseph Renaud and Armand Massard, champion of France. Foil by Louis Chevalier and Salier from the Cirque Roux. Saber by Latu, president of the Contrepoint, and Albert, I can never say his name. He was it was his idea to do this gala and coordinate all this to get all these famous people together. Very famous fencers, masters. Again, there's more épée de foil, épée Roger Dupré, who in the beginning of the 20th century, when the Olympics are begin, he was one of the people that would compete in the Olympics and did very well.
Yeah, Dupré is awesome. There's still video of him fencing.
Yeah, there is on YouTube. You can find a video of him fencing. There was also a demonstration by Professor Georges Dubois of the Opéra Comique with an adversary listed as an adversary of his choice. So I'm not sure who, because I haven't found an article that talks about the event after the fact. But Georges Dubois would have been doing a demonstration of ancient fencing. He is also famous for doing a lot of research on rapier and dagger, on Roman gladiator combat,
and self-defense too.
Yes, he's written works on self-defense. One of the best épée books in my consideration is written by him. You can also see him doing I think it's foil and dagger with
épée and dagger, I think.
Is it épée dagger or foil dagger with Lacaze? And that can also be found on YouTube.
Yeah, Dubois looks great. Lacaze looks like an idiot.
And then at the very end, they play La Marseillaise again. This is not from that event, but it is an image of Mergenac and Provost doing the Grand Salute, which is what they would have been doing at that gala. And that ends the slides, and we're happy to answer questions.
Yeah, so just to point out a few things, right? When you get to the point in the late 1800s where the Grand Assault, where they're adding a lot of this spectacle, this historical fencing, it becomes more common for women to step in and fence in this process, which is fantastic. And so we've kind of shown you this progression from the late 1700s and the assault of arms, going to the Great Assault of Arms, to the Grand Assault of Arms, where is really an exhibition of skill with the use of the sword for the time. And then as it moves into being grand and being made grander, according to Robert Milton, who was a sports column writer for Figaro, the French newspaper, he makes a comment that this was a time when everything is made grand, and you have titles of Grand Minister, and you have the Grand Opera and the Grand Hotel. So it is important that the assaults keep pace with the times. So everything has to become more extreme, more grand.
Yes. Okay, so Alyssa asks, there seems to be a lot of colors in the uniforms. When did the uniforms shift towards our format of white, gray, black uniforms? So the what the fencers are wearing, yes, in the 19th century, you have a variation. In the beginning of the 19th century, there are sometimes when they talk about what they're wearing, and they're usually wearing white. But as the 19th century progresses towards the latter half of the 19th century, you start to see other colors where you start to see them, because typically now they're wearing the men are wearing the not specific fencing pants, but pants they're wearing, and then they're just putting on the jacket. So you sometimes see pants that are different colors. In the beginning of the 20th century, there was still some even jackets that were like half white, half black, or sometimes brown, or sometimes tan. It's not till the Olympics where everything starts to shift to a more universal, where everybody starts wearing white. When we started, when Metro Martinez started Martinez Academy, we only had access to white uniforms because that's all they had, till eventually we were able to get someone to make the dark pants for us. And for us, it's a way of also showing that what we're doing is not what is being done in modern fencing. So we brought back the wearing of the dark pants or knickers or skirt. I haven't found photographs of a Grand Assault where you can see the actual crowd, because a lot of these are they're illustrations, they're not photographs. And sometimes we find photographs in newspapers, but they haven't been preserved well enough to actually make it usable. Another question: when was the last Grand Assault of Arms?
Yesterday.
So they did have some Grand Assaults of Arms in the 20th century, in the 20s, I believe, but because the Association of Historical Fencing doesn't go past the 19 with the creation of the FIE, we look at it as modern fencing, and we don't really look at that period. So I don't really research past
1905.
Well, 1913.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the latest that we go. Any other questions?
So next year is the 20th anniversary of the AHF and Martinez Academy hosting Grand Assault in New York. And we would like to mimic some of these earlier concepts in next year's Grand Assault to make it more grand.
Yes, to really do a Grand Assault. Initially, the first Grand Assaults that we used to do, because it was still semi-affordable and viable, we would do a Grand Assault. We would also have food. So we would have various like little appetizers, like coffee, tea for the people that came. But then things in New York just keep escalating. So it just became so expensive and not, and then some people, you can't bring in your own food. It has to be catered. And so we stopped doing that. But next year, we'd like to bring all of that back, to provide some refreshments, to make it really grand, to have, besides the assaults, to have demonstrations, which we used to do and we would do the finals for the public of the assaults, and then we would do demonstrations, because one of the missions of the HF is education. So we try to include some educational content with each one of these.
Interest is women or actual women.
Is it recreation of Chevalier Dion where the imitator is men, just as women or actual women? So the Chevalier Dion seems to be always played by a woman. So Madame Gabrielle, who played Monpan and who did the Monpan recreation in 1895. In 1894, in the previous Grand Assault, she was the one that played Dion.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yes, it appears Grand Assaults are progressively looking at fencing in a nostalgic manner. Is this a reflection on change in societal attitudes, decline in fencing practice, or other influences? Yes to all of the above. So there is at the second half of the 19th century, there is a kind of there is a nostalgia that happens in terms of looking back at all things. You start to see these people that are building these grand houses are having panoplies made because they don't, they didn't have them before because their families weren't of wealth before or aristocrats, but now they have a lot of money. So people are making panoplies, they're making weapons to look antique. There are all these 19th century weapons that are rapiers, long swords, all kinds of things that are being made really as wall hangers, specifically for these grand homes that are being built. But you also see an interest in by fencing masters in looking back at fencing histories and looking at specifically at fencing treatises. There is a move or an idea by some masters that they feel that that foil at that time, particularly in France, had become a bit decadent, and they wanted to bring back some of the older ideals. And so the epid that we see that comes about at the end of towards the end of the 19th century is a new weapon. It's a new weapon with this large cup guard that is now being taught using some of the older elements from small sword, but from early small sword. So this becomes the new weapon that is included in all of these grand assaults. Well, not in all, but in some of the grand assaults, and it becomes this new thing. So masters are writing these new treatises on this new weapon, but it is being based on a lot of the information from older treatises of small sword. But at the same time, while they're doing this, their interest in doing recreations, and so you start to see all these recreations in these particular assaults older fencing, because they're looking at it for a lot of purposes. Some were looking at these to inform themselves and create this new system for épée de combat. Some are looking at them as ways to recreate these different fencing forms for these particular assaults. Some of them are just looking back at these things as a way of invigorating what they know and being able to teach something else to their students. There is also a kind of ebb and flow, if you will, of fencing in the 19th century, where there is periods where it's really big. People will know what all these masters are, like in that image from the Figaro, where they say, we don't have to list all of them because by their face. But there's also this idea that throughout the 19th century, where there is periods where fencing seems to start to sort of not disappear, but it's not as popular. Then it becomes more popular. Then it's not so popular. Then it becomes more popular again. And again, that is different in different countries in different times. So we speculate, for example, that we're not seeing assault or grand assaults being announced in the beginning of the 19th century because of what's happening in France with the change or the
constant revolution.
Yes. So there's a lot in terms of what's happening in terms of changes in societal attitude. I think it's pretty clear that they're looking to encourage people to fence in ways that they promote the health benefits of it. But that's also included in how they look at fencing. So because in the 19th century, you also have this development of all this gymnastics and gymnasiums, where fencing now becomes a part of the gymnastics. In essence, it becomes one of the elements that you would learn there. In terms of social attitudes, also, there is a rise at the end of the 19th century in dueling. That's a whole nother lecture.
Yeah, because as in the late 1800s, you get the formation of the science of the épée, this new weapon, and as soon as they've refined it, that becomes decadent too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Ben's got a question there.
At what decade do more unusual weapons, non-foil épée saber, and non-fencing methods of pugilism, wrestling, etc., get brought into the grand assaults?
Yeah, you're seeing a lot more than in the late 1880s.
Right. But you do see that in the mid 19th century in the UK, where you see wrestling, you see vaulting, because they're doing a lot of these grand assaults are being performed by the military, and that's where you see all the sword feats as well. I think Savate and pugilism also is an interesting thing, because you sometimes see advertisements for grand assaults, but it's all boxing, it's all pugilism.
Yeah, it's a very English thing. I mean, the Chevalier Saint George was boxing as well in the late 1700s.
Yeah, somewhere there's also an illustration of the Chevalier Saint George boxing. In the background is a Chevalier Dion boxing with somebody else. And what seems to be the reasons?
Got to keep people interested.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much what it is. There's they're trying to attract as many people as possible to come to this. And by attracting more people, obviously you're able to promote more what you're doing or who you are, or to raise money. As we said, a lot of these things are to raise money. So you're trying to get as many people to attend. And so having a lot of variety, I would imagine, would attract more people.
Yeah, and Ben, I think definitely in the late 1800s, with the rise of that concept of physical culture, it's sort of necessary to tie in all this other physical activity into the process as well.
The question is, what is meant by decadent in fencing? Well, when they say that that foil has become decadent, they mean that it's sort of lost its original function or its original purpose. In that that fencing is now, they're doing things with a weapon that are not practical in the actual context of a duel, because from its inception, we look at fencing as being designed for that. The context of fencing is to learn to be able to defend yourself in a duel. It is the art of defense, but at the end of the 19th century, it sort of has become the art of offense, where a lot of things go, but it's not. And so you see a lot of different elements in the 19th century where some masters are very academic in their fencing, so they're still holding true to what fencing is in terms of teaching foil, and then others that are promoting the idea of tournaments. So they're willing to go the route of what eventually becomes modern fencing, which is, if it works in the context of the tournament, then that's what we're teaching. So that's what they mean by decadent.
Grand assault sorted by the military. So the grand assault was definitely a very heavily civilian thing. But in the late 1800s, when you get the rise of the military academies, you see them starting to take on this same guise as well.
Yeah, and that seems to be earlier in the UK, as we saw those demonstrations at the Willis Rooms, where it's all military, and they're doing the sword feats, they're doing the bayonet, they're doing all those things, and they include wrestling and boxing in those. But in France and in Italy, there was the rise of these military academies. But in France, the Joinville-le-Pont, where the military masters were being trained, there's a lot of these assaults where you see there are military masters that are fencing, or military provosts that are fencing, as well as civilian masters and provosts. So it becomes a big thing because they produce a lot of masters. And then the same thing happens in Italy to a lesser degree, but they're also trying to create this very specific unification, because Italy was not unified. Even when they unified, it wasn't unified.
Not even today.
The question is, did grand assaults take place outside of the aforementioned countries? I don't know. I haven't researched. I imagine they had them in Spain, because they did, especially in the 19th century, they did tend to follow the French, particularly adapting the French system, and also the Italian system. And they did do a lot of demonstrations and the like. So there is more work to be done, and especially looking in Spain. I'm sure Germany as well, and other places in Europe But again, I am currently limited by only being able to read the Italian, the French, and the Spanish, and sometimes the English.
So, and Andrew, as far as in Germany, I've not done any research on grand assaults there, but it was certainly very common to have exhibitions, and especially by the 30s, where this idea of bringing back the true German way of being, exhibitions in longsword and wrestling with costumes definitely existed. Was it a grand assault? I can't really say. I haven't looked that much into it, but I think it served a whole different purpose than what the grand assault served.
So Olympic sport fencing is decadent. Well, it is its own thing. We don't say it's decadent. It is its own thing. It's just it's a concept of the 19th century that they ascribed certain labels to fencing, like academic, traditional, decadent. I probably had other terms as well, but yeah, it's just a different thing.
Yeah, and so Taylor, oh yeah, there's a whole list of different sword feats that were performed. Things like cutting an apple on the back of someone's neck, throwing up a scarf in the air and cutting the scarf while was still in the air, placing a wooden dowel across two champagne glasses and cutting the wooden dowel without spilling the champagne, cutting lead bars of lead, cutting through legs of mutton. So yeah, so there are all sorts of sword feats that they would perform, and Waite in his treatise actually talks in detail about a number of these.
Yeah, the first one that we see in these advertisements is a Colonel Bushman, who actually was who learned fencing at the Angelo Academy, and then so when he would do demonstrations, he was doing demonstrations of small sword, but he also did all the demonstrations of the sword feats, and he was known also for saber and bayonet. And Waite actually trained with Bushman, so he must have learned the sword feats from him. But it's his book that we have today, that that we know how these things were done. Thank you all for coming, and as we said, we're looking towards doing one on the Grand Salute